So for the installation part, we have some requirements that have to be met in order to move forward. One of them, of course, being based on the platform you want to configure that. Like for example, if you speak about the ASA 5512 to ASA 5555X and the ASA 5585X, then you need a code and on the ASA of a code version of 9224 or later. And the minimum, the first supported firepower version is 5311. On this platform's code 54X, it is not being supported. Not 54X, 541. So I'm gonna correct that. 541 is not supported in there. Only 540. Let me quickly fix that up. Okay. Then if you speak about 5506, 5508 or 5516X platforms, you need to run a different code, minimum ASA version 9322 or later, and firepower 541 or later. Basically 541 came up to be supported on the ASA 5506, 8 and 16. Okay. And then the management port of the ASA, as we saw before, needs to be just enabled, and it has to be in the same VLAN as one of the ASA IP enabled data interfaces. Of course, assuming you want the ASA to be the default gateway of the firepower module, because otherwise, if the ASA is not a default gateway of the firepower module, clearly you don't need this. This step is not required. And of course, as on this platform, the firepower module is also known as SFR, probably from I don't know, software, fire, whatever. I don't know the convention where it comes from. And as we saw before, also in Cisco documentation, it's supported both in raw and transparent mode, likewise single, multiple context mode. So once you meet the prerequisites, you're running the proper version on the SA, and you have the proper firepower version you want to install, then we have to go to the installation steps. First of them being that you have to verify if the system you're running, your physical ASA, has any of the IPS or CX modules installed. It could be likewise out of the physical option on the 5585X or the software version on the AutoX devices. If that is the case, you have to uninstall either of them before moving forward, because it's not supported to run multiple options at the same time. Like you cannot run both firepower and IPS or firepower and CX at the same time. And if you ask me, it doesn't even make sense. Not only because it's an overlap, like the IPS and CX together are doing even less than firepower, but also because it's an overlapping. So why would you want to inspect the traffic through both the old IPS of Cisco and then through the newer IPS of Cisco, which basically is way better because it also contains the Cisco's rules and IP and Snort rules. So it doesn't make sense from my point of view. So also that's why it's not supported. So if any of those modules are installed, you have to initially uninstall them before moving on forward. Then of course you have to copy the boot image. So the installing the firepower system by itself has two steps. First, you have to install the boot image on SA Flash. So copy it on the SA Flash and then load the boot image, which basically does nothing else but format the SSD and partition it and create directories, so you can then install the firepower application by itself. And of course you have to configure once you have loaded and installed the boot image, you have to configure it for IP connectivity, because then from that boot image you're gonna install the system image, which the system image is going to be your firepower instance, the application running in there, which is nothing else in the end but a Linux box behind the scenes. So once the boot image has been loaded and installed, then you have to copy the system image on an FTP, HTTP or HTTPS server. So you cannot load and install the Firepower image or the system image from the ASA flash. You have to, for a specific reason, because ASA doesn't support the FTP server or the HTTP server or the HTTPS server. It's only FTP server is not supported. HTTP or HTTPS is supported only for SSL VPN or for managing the SA, but it doesn't support, the SA doesn't support to behave like an HTTP server where from you can download content. So that means that the system image has to be copied on an external FTP or HTTP server. And then you install the system image, and then you configure finally the IP connectivity, which is going to be the IP addressing, the network connectivity of the Firepower system. So again, you want to install any of the pre-configured modules. You load the boot image, which you can download from Flash. And once that is being installed, then configure for IP connectivity. Then you finally install the Firepower image from a remote HTTP, HTTPS, FTP server. And of course, you configure it for IP connectivity. So uninstalling let's walk through all of those 3 steps. Uninstalling existing software module. First of all, you do show module to see if any of those are pre-installed. And if any of those are pre-installed, then you're going to see one of them being in the upstate. Like in this case here, as you can see, the IPS is in the upstate. The CX module or SFR module are not pre-installed. So in my case in here, it means I have to uninstall the IPS module, which of course I did. You have 2 commands to do that. So a software module IPS shut. So first of all, you have to shut down the module. You cannot take any action whatsoever until you shut down the module. So you say switch module IPS or switch module CXSC shut down. Once you have done that, you have to wait. So you take action, switch module IPS shut down, and before moving forward, you have to verify and make sure that the module is actually down. Otherwise, anything you want to do further on, you're gonna receive some error messages, or it's gonna do nothing at all. So you say show module IPS if IPS was installed, or show module CXSC if the CX module was installed, and you confirm that the module is in the down state. So DSA was able to properly shut down the module. Only afterwards you move to the next step, which means finally you uninstall the module with one of those 2 commands, depending on which module was pre-installed. So software module IPS uninstall, or software module CXSC uninstall. And I added here an example of that. It tells you it's going to uninstall IPS, and of course it is going to take a couple of minutes. It's going to take more time on the CX module than on the IPS module. It could take 5-10 minutes or so to completely uninstall it in there. Now before we move on, you verify again that the module has been uninstalled. So you say show module IPS or show module CXSC, and if the module was successfully uninstalled, then you're going to see it in the down state likewise, but you're going to see that image is unknown. So when you see as in here that IPS unknown, no image present, it means that the module has been successfully uninstalled. Now this step, Cisco recommends in some documents to also do a reload of the SA, which per my experience it was never actually a requirement, only have a problem, and it clearly doesn't make sense to bring down the firewall, especially if you don't have redundancy, just to uninstall this. So in most cases you don't have to do a reload. You can continue after the module was uninstalled with the installation of the Firepower. Okay, let's see if we have any questions so far. Okay, no. So installing the first step being for the Firepower services, as we said before, is to install the boot image. So you say first of all, configure the boot image location. It has to be on Flash. you say switch software module, module SFR recover configure, and then image and the location could be disk 0 or disk 1, depending of course on which ASA module you're running, and then the boot image in there. This is basically like when you say boot system on the DSA is the same thing. So you can look at this command like the same thing, like you do boot system disk whatever and the ASA version of the DSA. You tell as you tell the DSA what is the operating system to load. Do the same thing in here, but with a different command. Once you have done that, then you tell him to load and install the boot image. You say switch module, software module, module SFR recover boot. Which, if you want to compare that with the SA, is like after you have configured the image to be loaded, is like you do on the SA a reload. Of course, here is not the reload command; it's just boot up, the same thing. So now that I told you the location of the boot image, go ahead and load that up. Which, depending on the again on the SA platform you run, which hardware module, and of course depending on also the which version you're gonna install. If it's 5.3, 5.4, 6.0, 6.0.1, it is gonna vary on the timing in there. It usually it takes like more or less 15 minutes, but of course it could take more than that. And of course, command being, as you said before, software module SFR recover boot is going to tell you that, okay, are you sure we're going to do that? So then it's going to reload the software module, or on the 5585X the hardware module, and boot up with the configured image. Now, one of the let's say things that might be a bit weird is that this command show module SFR cannot be used at this point to verify if the boot image has been successfully loaded. Because again, show module SFR would mean show me the state of the SFR module, which means show me the state of the firepower system, of the firepower module in there. And we're not there yet, because this step in here, you're just loading the boot image. We have not yet reached the step which we have to actually install the firepower service on top of there, because loading the boot image is only required so that the ASA can properly format the SSD, can create the directories, so that we can actually properly afterwards install the application, the firepower services. So if you're gonna run this command to see if the boot image has been successfully loaded, you're gonna see nothing at all. You're gonna see the state of being unknown. So then you have two options to see when the ASA has finished successfully loading the boot image, which means either you can say debug module boot, and it's gonna tell you, is gonna show you on the console, or of course on the VTI lines, the step-by-step process that the loading process goes through. Or you can say constantly, like after 10 or 15 minutes, given the fact that it should be finished, you can say show module SFR log console. And what you should see whenever you see that this message, like starting BusyBox, and then starting all the services, and then finally when you see that message Cisco SA SFR boot image and the image you've configured, it means at that point the boot image has properly been loaded, and you can proceed to the next step. Like for example, if we go on our ASAs in here, and let me increase the font in here to make it a bit more visible. Okay. Like you go in here and say I'm too late in doing debug module boot because the module has been loaded, but show module SFR log console should still keep the messages. Show module log, of course module SFR, because, and then log console. There you go. The disk image was created successfully, and then it is gonna, as you can see, it mounts the disk. It creates different partitions in here. So there we go. It mounts the disk. It starts creating in different partitions in there. Gives a warning that all data will be lost. Of course, doesn't matter. And then it does the stuff in there, installs the it's not a Linux, of course, kernel behind the scenes, and at some point in the end you're gonna see that message there, which I also showed you, and that's the message which is gonna tell you that at that point you know that the boot image was successfully loaded, and you don't move forward until that message has happened. And if it takes more than 15 half an hour or so, it means you would have to reload the ESA ideally, and then before you move forward you're gonna do a debug to see at which point it stops and what is the exact problem why it stops. So we should pretty much soon reach a point where it is being done. Well, this is the, so probably I've been going too long, but still I've showed you so what you should look for is that message Cisco ASA SFR boot image 540. If, as I stated, it doesn't work, you reload it, and then before you boot it, you try to load the image again, you say debug that command module boot, and of course you also have a level, default being level 1. I will leave it a default level of 1, and if I don't see anything useful, I would increase the level. Usually I put it at 128 to be in the middle to see more output, but actually I would leave it at default 1, load it again and see where it breaks and why. So once we've passed this, then finally we can go to actually install the once we've installed the SFR boot image, we have to go and configure it. So we're going to open a console session. Given the fact that this is the software version of the Firepower services, it means I'm going to say session SFR console from the ESA itself. You have to authenticate it with username admin and password admin123, and you have to configure IP connectivity, host name, DNS, and NTP server, ideally via the setup command. The commands you have available from the boot image are basically pretty much Cisco classic commands, show commands, configure, setup. You have very few options in there, but you're gonna go in there and use the setup command to configure basic IP connectivity on the system. This is required in order for you to further load the actual Firepower system image. You can do, of course, some basic checks as well. You can say show version to verify the boot image. Maybe somebody else has loaded the boot image and you have to make sure you load the proper system image on top of that. You can say show interfaces to see the Ethernet 0 interface, the configuration of that. Show route to see what is your default gateway if you're not sure about that. And of course we can verify network connectivity via ping traceroute or NS lookup. Because, for example, if you're gonna load the the system image further on from an FTP server or HTTP server via domain name, then you could do NS lookup to see if the name is resolvable, or you could do a trace route. Assuming that trace route is not filtered by a firewall, you could do a trace route to see where network connectivity breaks, because you might not have connectivity with the FTP server from where you're gonna next install the system image. So once we're done with that step, then finally at that point we're gonna go and install the Firepower system image, which you can look at, as I said before, nothing else but another Linux application, Linux image, which runs a specific application on top of that. The application being the Firepower service. So now what you have to do is from being cancelled to the firepower boot image, to call it that way. You say system install, and then you say FTP or HTTP. You put username password, so username dash username colon password, assuming that the FTP server requires for authentication, and then you say at the IP address of the FTP server or the domain name, of course, if DNS resolution works, and then the system image you're trying to load in there. Now this installation is going to take much more time, can take 30 minutes, can take more than 30 minutes, because this is actually installation of a a Linux box with the firepower service on top of that. And also the copying is going to take pretty much a long time, because the size of that image could be half a gig, 800 megs, or it depends on the version you're installing. Once the once the installation has been performed, it is going to ask you for a reboot. So you have to either stay connected, or of course get back later after 20 minutes or 40 minutes or so and confirm that you want to reboot. So it is going to ask for confirmation. Once the reboot has happened, you go and say show SFR, and now at this point you are going to see the state. The state to be, you have to see the state up and running. So after the installation of the system image and the rebooting, which you confirmed, you say show module SFR, and it has to show up in the app state. Otherwise you're not going to be able to connect to the device further on. You again open a console session, you say session SFR console, but this time you're going to be connected to the firepower system image. You authenticate this time with the username admin and the password SourceFire. So no longer the password is admin123. You accept the end user license agreement. If you don't want to scroll to tons of pages in there, what you're going to do is you're going to say Control C, say yes to accept, and then move on towards it's going to prompt you for basic network configuration. So you don't have to do anything. After you accept the EULA, then it's going to prompt you for network configuration. So you're going to change first it's going to ask you to change the user password. Of course, you put whatever you want in there. You can change it later on as well, but you have to change it at that point. You cannot move forward without that configuration. And then it's going to walk you through a step-by-step process where you configure the IP and DNS connectivity. This time, of course, this IP address, it is going to be finally that IP address that I'm going to be using, in my case being .70, the IP address of the firepower service, which is finally used to connect to the Fireside Management Center, to send the DNS traffic to server A, or NTP traffic, DNS or NTP, or whatever else, and then upload files to Cisco's cloud for sandboxing. So the first IP we have configured for the boot image was just a temporary IP address used to be able to load the firepower system image from a remote FTP or HTTP server. But after the firepower image is installed, that IP address is gone. It doesn't matter anymore. It's no longer used. Now, of course, likewise in here, as I was saying, you configure IP and DNS connectivity. I forgot to state a couple of minutes ago, when you configure the NTP server, because the NTP server is important, the firepower has to have time synchronized. Then what you do is, in general, you could either point to the Fireside Management Center to be the NTP server, or of course, if you have a centralized NTP server, you can point it to that one. And of course, it supports authentication as well. Then we have a couple of commands to verify what we've done to make sure that the firepower service is properly installed. So from the firepower console, you have a couple of useful commands. Let's walk through those. So you say session console SFR, session SFR console, and then you say admin and a password that you have configured, you have changed. In my case, I was pre-connected. And you can say show version to confirm that the proper version and build was installed. You can say show network, which is basically verification of the of what you have configured to the GUI you've been prompted through. So it shows you that the Ethernet 0 interface, which is a logical interface, which is basically mapped, technically speaking, to the physical management port of the ESA. So this is the logical interface of the firepower, which technically speaking is mapped to the management physical port of the ESA. Of course, it's going to be running auto negotiation, the regular MTU 1500, the MAC address of firepower. And then of course configuration was done manually. You could configure firepower to get an IP address via DHCP, but in my case, in general, of course you're going to be using a static address. Doesn't make sense to have the management interface of firepower to be dynamically assigned. Even to a reservation doesn't make sense at all. So I configured that IP address, that mask to the GUI, to the process, and it doesn't show in here the default gateway. We're going to look in a couple of another output. And then Ethernet 1, in this case, it is not being used temporarily. It's only Ethernet 0, which is being used for bond management and events. Then you can say show if config, because this is a Linux box, which is going to show you nothing else but, again, the fact that it has a loopback, like any other host which has a loopback in the range of 127 something, with a scope of being able to loop back traffic back and forth for itself. Also the IPv6 loopback. So the GUI is going to ask you for both IPv4 and IPv6 configuration. And on Ethernet 0 is going to show, of course, the IP address, the mask address. And because I have not configured any IPv6 addresses, which means it's going to make use of Slack, it got self-configured only with a link local address derived from the MAC address of the Ethernet 0 interface. You also have show interfaces. So show if config is going to show the physical details of the Ethernet interface, while show interfaces is going to show you the interfaces of the ASA. Gig 00, the ones that are enabled, of course, Gig 01 and Gig 02. And there the communication with the ASA for inspecting traffic from the firepower system is done to the control plane via the loopback address of both the ASA and of the firepower system. I think to show the default gateway you have show route. There you go, show route. It is going to show you for IPv4 and IPv6 a routing table, and which for IPv4 the default gateway in my case, so for all other destinations except the connected ones, default gateway is 10.2, which is the interface of the ASA. As you can see, I reached that destination through my logical interface Ethernet 0, which is mapped to the physical management port of the ASA.